So today we will have a look at a few ways we can create ARPs, we can create arpeggios in VCVREC and in the modular environment in general, basically taking a chord or the notes of the chord, and instead of playing them all together, we play them one after the other. I want to start with two dedicated modules in VCVREC that will do this for us. Basically, the first one is the ARP module from Hampton Harmonics. If you follow this channel, you know that I use it quite a lot. I really like it. It's quite easy and intuitive and fun to use. So again, this module will arpeggiate a chord. It will break a chord into its individual notes and will play them, the notes, one after the other. So for this, we will need a chord. Now, there are many ways we can create chords in VCVREC. In this case, in this example, I'm using the diatonic CV module from Aaron Static. And as you can see, the chords here are moving quite randomly. I'm using here a random signal to move between the different chords of the scale. Right, so this signal will be polyphonic. It will be a few notes together, right? You can see this. If I connect this now to the volt per octave input of the ARP module, right, you see we have in this case 3 channels, so we have 3 notes, and this is a polyphonic signal, and the ARP module is expecting also a polyphonic signal. It's expecting a chord, right? So this signal will say, or will tell the ARP module which notes to play, and the clock input will tell the ARP module how quickly to play them one after the other. Now, just because it says clock, of course, you don't need to use the clock module. You can use also a sequencer and all sorts of different other sources. I'm going to use the clock module, the clock from Impromptu, and multiplied by 4 clock. Right, so now the notes will be arpeggiated according to this tempo, according to this rate. And we need to tell also the ARP module when actually to activate, to actually arpeggiate the chords. And this we do through the gate input. I'm going to use a clock division for this, the same clock division that will change the chords. Right, and now this can go to our voice, and we have now a regular signal. It will not be polyphonic anymore because again it will play the notes one after the other and not together. So we have the volt per octave that will go to the volt per octave of our voice. I'm using here the sine VCO, and the gate output will go in this case to the envelope I'm using. Right? And now instead of having the chords, we have the different notes of the chords arpeggiated, played one after the other. And there are a few things we can do here. For example, we can have an additional octave. Right, we can have a different order for the notes. Right, and like this we can arpeggiate. We can arpeggiate this chord. Now, something I like doing with this ARP module is using offset to keep it open all the time and basically have it always active, always arpeggiating the chords. Now, there are a few ways we can do this. Basically, we need a gate that will stay high all the time. In VCVREC, there are a few options for this. We can use something like the offset module from Bog Audio. If I take the offset all the way up, you see, basically we have a signal that will stay up, right? Basically an open gate. We can do this also with the CV mix module. It can also send offset, also with 8-vert from VCV. Right, so basically we need a signal that will stay high. Right, and here I have more or less the same setup. And I have here the offset module from Bog Audio. If I send this to the gate input of the ARP module and I open the offset, right now it will always arpeggiate. Right, it will always arpeggiate the chords. I can also have 7th chords, so we have 4 notes. Another module I really like is the Super Arpeggiator from Modular. This is a bit more complex. It's a deeper module than the one from Hampton Harmonics, but it's very interesting. I did also a video using it a while ago where I built this interesting setup where you just hold the chord and all sorts of different magic things start to happen. I will put a link in the description, of course, if you are interested. But this is the Super Arpeggiator from Modular, and in this case, I'm using a different module to generate chords. This is the NoteSec 16 from JW. You can also use it to generate chords. In the right-click menu, you can choose how many channels of polyphony you want. Right, and now, again, you send the volt per octave. Again, the volt per octave has to be polyphonic. Again, the ARP module and the Super Arpeggiator will arpeggiate chords, will arpeggiate polyphonic pitch information. Right, so here I have the volt per octave. In this case, I'm going to use the gate, the polyphonic gate from the NoteSec 16, and you will see soon enough also why. And again, to tell the Super Arpeggiator how quickly to arpeggiate the notes, I'm going to use again a multiplied by 4 clock. Now nothing happens, and something happens only once in a while. Let's wait for it again. Right, and this is because the gate signal here is too short. Now in the case of the NoteSec 16, in the right-click menu, we can change the gate mode from trigger to continuous. Right, and then we get the results we want. So make sure that if you're using the Super Arpeggiator, first of all, you have to use a polyphonic gate. Right, and I will show you in a second also a few ways you can do this. And also that the gate stays open, right, for the duration that you want it to stay open. Right, so in this case, again, this is a bit more of a complex module. There are a few things we can do here. For example, we have also a sort of a sequencer that we can use. Now here, if we have, for example, 4 notes and we have 4 steps, each note, right, will play the corresponding step. But in this case, sometimes there are 4, sometimes there are 5, which means that we can get really interesting results that will always be in motion. So if I have, for example, 4 steps, already something changed here. Right, we can go and for each step we can have different settings. So for example, I can say step number 2 will be an octave up. Right, or I can have, let's have 8 steps actually, and then change, maybe do this. Right, and already you can see the potential here. Right, of course, also here we can change the direction the notes are playing, forward, backward, pendulum. Right, and this will change the direction of the notes, right, not of the sequence, but of the notes. So again, you will get interesting results. Right, we can also add glides to the different notes. So if, for example, here I want glide, I just turn this on and I change the glide. Right? I can also change for each note the direction for each step. So if I go here to program mode, right, now they will all go forward, but I can say 5, 6, and 7 will go backward. Right, have a look here. Right, I can also repeat a note, I can add a rest, or I can skip a note altogether. Right, can be also quite interesting. And we have also accents, so I can add accents per note. So if I send, for example, the accent output to the modulation of the feedback, right, and let's say I want step 2, and let's say 5 and 7 to be with an accent. Right, have a look here, you see we get a voltage. Right, so again, the Super Arpeggiator is quite more complex, it's quite deeper. There are many things you can experiment with here. Right, now let me show you what happens, right, when you don't have a polyphonic gate. Right here I have again the diatonic CV. It has no gate output, it has only volt per octave output. Right, so if I connect the chord to the volt per octave, the clock again will come from the clock, and the gate, just like we did before, will come from a clock division. Right, we get nothing. We get basically one note, one channel, because the gate here is not polyphonic. In the case of the super arpeggiator, you need to use a polyphonic gate to tell the super arpeggiator how many notes of polyphony you actually have. The volt per octave is not enough in this case. Right, so let me show you what you can do. There are a few ways you can do this. For example, there is the polymult module from Bog Audio that will basically take a monophonic signal and will mult it, right? So here I have the same gate, the same clock signal. Right, here you can see how many channels of polyphony we have. Right, we have here 1, but now I can mult it, for example, to have 8. So now this clock will basically be multed 8 times and we get a polyphonic signal. Right, another thing you can do is you can use merge from VCV just to create duplicates. So let's say I want to have 5 channels of polyphony. I hold control, right, and I can just grab another cable, and then I have here 5, and you can see we have 5 channels of polyphony. Right, so this you can also do. I find the polymult a bit more easy to use because you don't need so many cables. Right, and then basically what you do here, I have the same setup, right? The volt per octave is going to the volt per octave, the clock is going to the clock, and the gate will go first through the polymult, right? And then from there to the gate input, and now I can multiply it, and we get the results we want. Right, so this is something you can use. Of course, there are other modules in VCV that you can use. There is the ARP from Bog Audio, the Poly ARP from ML. There is also this one from Shebang, which is called Talia, I guess, or Talia, something like this, which should be also quite interesting. So you should experiment with all of them. Just again, make sure that if something is not working for you, use a polyphonic gate or a polyphonic clock signal. Sometimes different modules expect different signals, so make sure to experiment with this. And of course, there are also some options in hardware. For example, there is the ARP module from 2HP. Now, this will not work with polyphonic signals. Of course, there are no polyphonic signals in hardware until at least not that I know of, right? But still, it will arpeggiate chords, and you can use this. And there is also the 2HP, the 1U quantizer from Mosaic, right, that can also arpeggiate chords. Also in hardware, there are a few options that you can experiment with. Another interesting technique you can experiment with, and it works also great in hardware, is using an LFO to create arpeggios. Right, here I have a triangle LFO. Basically, it's a signal that goes up and down. Right, so we can use this to create also pitch information if we use also a quantizer. Now, here you can see that this LFO oscillates between +5 and -5 volts. Basically, all in all, we have 10 volts, which means 10 octaves, right? 1 volt per octave. If we have 10 volts, we have 10 octaves. This is a bit too much, I guess, at least in my opinion. So I like attenuating the LFO first. In this case, in VCV, I can just use the VCA to attenuate signals. Right, so I'm going to attenuate this a bit, just so it's not its range will not go too high, right, and it will fit the pitch information I want to use, right, and then this I can use and send this to a quantizer, right, and then to my voice. Right, now I can also use a clock to drive this the voice. Right, something I like doing, this is a bit choppy, something I like doing is using sample and hold to make sure everything stays in sync, right? So here I have the random module from VCV. Basically, it's a sample and hold module, so it will sample the incoming pitch in this case with each and every trigger that I'm going to use from the clock, right? So the pitch information will first of all go to the input of the sample and hold. From the output, it will go back to our voice, and the trigger will come also from the clock. Right, and now we have an arpeggio that will be synced to the clock basically. And according to the frequency of the LFO you're using, you will get also some variation and also the notes you have on the quantizer. In this case, I have 4 notes. If I add more, right, like this really I can play with everything. And I can also use a different shape. I can use a saw wave, for example, so it will go up. And then directly down. Right, and again, according to the frequency of the LFO, you can get also interesting variation without changing anything. Right, the ratio between the frequency of the LFO and the rate of the clock. Right, so this is something you can experiment with. Of course, if you have an LFO, for example, that can be synced to the clock, this will be even easier, right? Here I have it synced to the clock. This is the LFO from VCV. And I'm also using a different quantizer that has also scenes. So this is Revin from Rappelzahn, right? And you can see I have different scenes saved. I can also sequence between them if I want. Right, so if I use this now, right, again, the LFO is synced to the clock, so the results will always be repetitive. And I have the scenes. Also here you can try this in hardware with something like scales from IntelliGel, which is a quantizer that you can also shift, you can also transpose, and it has also a trigger input, so it has this sample and hold functionality built in. You don't need an additional module. You just send your attenuated LFO into the input. You have a trigger that you want to use, that you want to sync to, and you get the arpeggiated result. Another way I want to show you, and again this works great also in hardware, is using a sequential switch to arpeggiate the notes of a chord. Basically a sequential switch will switch between its inputs in this case sequentially, so one after the other. So if you are using different notes, we can sequentially move between them. In this case I'm using Harmonic from Instrua, which is of course also available in hardware. It has multiple outputs. It has the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh of the chords. Right, so like this, if I send this to the sequential switch, in this case I'm using the sequential switch from VCV, it has multiple inputs and 1 outputs, right? So I'm sending the 4 notes of the chord to it. From there it goes to the oscillator, right? And now we need to tell the sequential switch how quickly to switch between the notes. In this case I'm going to use again a clock, but you can use a sequencer, you can use a random signal and so on. Right, and you can see now it's switching between the notes, and if I trigger the voice as well, right? Right, like this I can arpeggiate the notes of the chords. Right, of course, there are also other switches that you can use. In this case, I'm using the one from Count Modula. It has 8 inputs and all sorts of different directions. In this case, it's running in pendulum, right? And I'm using a random voltage to switch between the different notes, in this case, the different chords, right? So it will sound like this. Right, so this is another way you can do this. And of course, there are other modules in VCVRAC that you can use to output multiple notes of a chord. There is harmonic that we've seen. There is also the chord key from Impromptu. As you can see, there are multiple outputs, right, that you can use with a sequential switch to arpeggiate the notes. In this case, it's running in random, so it will basically randomly choose the next note. Right, and I have here a few chords saved. Right, so you can use also other modules. Right, and what happens when you use a module that has no multiple outputs like harmonic or the module from Impromptu? I'm going back to the diatonic CV module. It has only one output, the polyphonic output. If I want to arpeggiate this with a sequential switch, all I have to do is split this polyphonic signal into its monophonic signals, basically, and I'm using the split module from VCV, and you can see I have the four notes of the chord going to the sequential switch, right? So like this, I can also use it to arpeggiate the chords. And again, also here, there are a few options in hardware. If you want to try this in hardware, there is Shifty from IntelliGel, which is a sequential switch that has 4 inputs in this case that you can use to sequentially switch between the notes and arpeggiate chords. Right, there is also the Boss Bow 2 from ALM that has 8 inputs, right, that you can use. And I believe that with the Tetrapad, also from IntelliGel, you can output multiple notes, right, and then send them to the switch and arpeggiate them, sequentially switch between them. So there is harmonic from Instruo that we've seen. There is also Tetrapad, I believe, that can work, right? And that was it. I hope you found this video somewhat useful. Go and experiment with these ideas. Cheers.